Welcome to Talking with Tech. My name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with Rachel Madel. Hey, Rachel, how was the Grand Canyon?
It was amazing, Chris. It was so good, but I have to tell you, I am so tired.
So in case people missed it, tell us about the trip. What were you doing?
So I had the rare opportunity to hike to Havasupai. It's a reservation in the middle of the Grand Canyon, a Native American reservation, and it has the most amazing blue water and the coolest waterfalls you could ever imagine. But in order to get there, you have to hike 10 miles, and then you have to camp while you're there. And you have to get a permit, which the permits sell out within, 2 hours of them going on sale for the year. And it was really intense, but really amazing. And I'm just so happy that I was able to go. It's been on my bucket list for a really long time. So I finally checked that off the bucket list.
You didn't go by yourself, or did you go with friends, or how did it all work?
Yes, I went with a group of my friends. We've all been trying to get these permits for, I guess, 2 years now, and we finally got them. And so, I went with a group of my best friends, and it was so fun. We're so tired though. We kept joking the whole trip. We were like, now we need a vacation from our vacation, because that was not a vacation. I think over the course of 3 days, we hiked almost 30 miles. So it was super intense.
That sounds awesome. I wish I could have gone. That would have been so cool.
I know. And what was really cool? The only way you can get in is by hiking 10 miles, or they also have, I think 2 or 3 times a week, they have a helicopter. And so of course, we were hiking out and so tired. The last 2 miles is straight up. I think you gain almost 3,000 feet in elevation gain, because basically you have to hike down into the Grand Canyon, and then you kind of walk along the basin of the Grand Canyon to get to the campsite and the waterfalls. But the last 2 miles straight up, and it was helicopter day. So we kept seeing these helicopters fly by, and I was like, please take me on your helicopter. But we made it, and I felt super accomplished at the end.
So while you were in the Grand Canyon, I was in Connecticut. I got to present at a conference there. And so something interesting happened there, Rachel, is that, so I was presenting a 3-hour workshop on the fundamentals of AAC. And the room, when I got there, I didn't realize this is how it was going to be. I'm used to presenting sort of in a flat room. Do you know what I mean? This was auditorium style, like a theater, if you will, which made it very different. Having done many presentations, it's rare that I'm in that sort of style, like an old college lecture hall or something. This was actually in a museum that had a big movie screen behind it and everything. I was like, ooh, I should be in IMAX, And as people do, they came in and they sat in the back. Most people don't come right and sit in the front. And so I just moved to do the entire presentation from the stairs, But it's amazing how the environment changes the presentation and the communication and the whole experience, because I try and have many interactive experiences, so it's not just me talking the entire time, And there's a part where I said, well, I'll get together and just break up into small groups and see how many words you can make from this core communication board. When you're sitting in tables and you're in a big flat area, people will get up and they'll move, and the chairs have rollers, they can move around, and people will get together and work in small groups. But when you're in a theater style and you're already sitting in this chair and you're on one end of the auditorium and someone else is on the other, people aren't getting up and moving. They're not even turning around because it's uncomfortable. And so it was hard to work in a collaborative space. And I'm just realizing how much the environment really impacts the learning experience and the communication that happens in that experience.
And I think that's such an important reminder when we're thinking about the children that we work with, right? We know the setting up the environment can be so beneficial on so many levels. From a sensory standpoint, making sure that a child's not, directing a window that's shining bright light in their eyes, especially if we're thinking about children with access issues or children who are using eye tracking. These are all really important things to keep in mind. Generally speaking, I think environment is important for everyone, as you mentioned, Chris. I know myself, I have to be, if I'm going to be sitting and doing really hard task cognitively, I can't have clutter everywhere. So I'm like, okay, first I need to clean my desk off. I need to just do some preparation before I'm going to maximize my efforts. And so I think it's just so important to think about. And I love working with occupational therapists, because out of all of the kind of disciplines I think that they remember, both environment and posture are so, so important. So if you have any OTs that you can collaborate with, just doing an overlap session with, maybe a child who has some sensory challenges, or, it's just so beneficial to collaborate in those ways. And a lot of what I've learned from sensory, obviously, has been from occupational therapy, and doing those overlaps. They're so important.
I find it often the environment is almost invisible. And so how do we make it more transparent? And so just as an example, because this is going to be maybe a funny one, Rachel, is that you and I right now are recording via Zoom, right? We've said many times that we've never actually met in person. And people can't see this right now, but you're wearing glasses, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I'm kind of looking at you in the Zoom, you're looking at a computer screen, and the reflection of your computer screen is on your glasses. So I can't really see your eyes. It's just these big blue spots covering your eyes because of your computer screen. In fact, it's me, really. And if I really, if I freeze framed it and zoomed in, I'd be looking at a mirror reflection of me in your eyes. That is something that is just so subtle, right? But imagine if you are really distracted by that, what if that is what you're focusing on and you're keying on? And that would be something that would be, I could really easily interpret like that I'm not looking at you, or I'm shying away, or that it's a behavior of mine, when really it's that piece of the environment that is impacting the communication exchange.
And you hit the nail on the head, Chris. The kids that I work with who have autism, I can't wear my glasses around them because the exact same thing happens. They're seeing their reflection in my glasses. Even if I have a Band-Aid on my finger, they're distracted sometimes. I have another little guy, and I typically wear my hair back. But I was going to some type of networking event. So I had my hair down and totally threw him off, just like seeing me with my hair down. So it's just like these small things, like you said, they can be attributed to like, oh, well, he's not attending, or he's being behavioral, or, all these things. And it's just like, you don't even realize, are happening. Same thing. I have reflection from my watch sometimes is enough to distract one of the students I'm working with. So just keeping those things in mind is so important. I think we kind of jump when a child's not doing, what we want them to do. It's just like our brain jumps to like, oh, they're just not listening, and like instead it should be, okay, how can I manipulate the environment, or think about really thinking through their lens, right? Thinking like, what are they seeing right now? And sometimes what I'll do is I'll literally move my chair over, because I know we've all worked with those kids, and it's like, what are you looking at? Like, what is behind my shoulder that's so interesting that like you can't like really attend to what I'm saying or doing. And sometimes I'll just scooch my chair over and I'll sit next to them, just to see like from their vantage point, like what's going on down here. And sometimes it's nothing, but sometimes it's like, oh, you see a construction worker outside the window. That's what's happening right now. So I think it's just really important reminder.
Yeah, and I think it's a mindset of leading with that idea, right? There's a thought that sometimes you want to, kind of like you said, the student is not doing this, so therefore I'm blaming the student. But what if you led with the thought that it is never the student's fault? So there's something else that's causing this distraction, And then what can I do to, one, figure it out, and what can I do then to mitigate that distraction? For instance, you mentioned how putting a student by a window, someone might look out the window, or that the window might reflect off the computer screen or the screen of the communication device. And from your angle, you might not see that reflection. It might look completely clean and easy to access, but from where the student's sitting, that reflection, whatever the device might be like a mirror to them. You know what I mean? Because of the reflection off the window. And those sorts of things, just leading with the idea that, maybe it's environmental, maybe it's something I'm doing, maybe it's some other element than something that's internal to the student.
And the other thing I think about too, when we're thinking about distractors, is sometimes we don't realize, there's auditory distractors that are present that really make communication difficult and make language processing more difficult, which is why it's so important that we give students an alternative means to communicating. And that leads perfectly into our interview today. We're talking with Alyssa Hillary Zisk, and they talk about how important it is for adults with autism to have a backup communication system.
Rachel, can I interrupt you for a second and ask, you interviewed one person, but you're using the pronoun they. Can you explain that for a second?
Yes. So Alyssa identifies as non-binary. Yes. So after completing the pre-interview questions, Alyssa wrote, "Heads up, I'm non-binary. You can ask me about gender issues, but not, quotes, as a woman, because I'm not one. My pronouns are they, them, theirs." So of course we want to respect Alyssa, and we are going to be using those pronouns when we talk about Alyssa.
So before we jump into the interview, let's just talk about a kind of a follow-up to what we've talked about in a previous banter, which was the article, the Kathy Binger article, about how parents should be cautious of going out and buying apps on their own, and that they needed an AAC assessment before they did that. We talked about that in a previous episode, and there has been some follow-up to that kind of conversation. Dana Nieder came out on her blog, the Uncommon Sense blog, and she wrote another blog post that kind of in response to that one that Kathy Binger wrote, basically saying respect the parents, understand that people come from different perspectives, kind of what we were saying in our banter, that there's multiple ways that people can find their voice through AAC and find the tool that works for them as a person and for their family, right? And then what happened after that, Rachel, just to kind of keep everyone up, and I really advocate for people to find these articles. We can link them in our show notes. Kathy Binger actually wrote a comment to Dana Nieder in the blog, which was so well worded and so professional. And I just thought it kind of spoke to me, and I hope to a lot of people, about just how professional correspondence should happen. You know, sometimes social media, I've said it before, I'll say it again, kind of gets a bad rap, that conversations can devolve into arguments, you know, and it's all about getting your side and your point of view across and who's right. And this is not that at all. There's this total respect, back and forth that really shapes the whole conversation. And I don't know, I just felt like it was a really good correspondence that I feel like anyone working in the field should kind of read and internalize.
Exactly. And this is why, social forums are so powerful sometimes, is because you look at things through your specific lens, and your specific experience shapes what you think about something. But it's really important to think about different perspectives. And I think this is the perfect example of that. Often I've seen, especially on Facebook groups, just kind of like mudslinging, it feels like. It's like, well, this is what I believe, and what you believe isn't true. And that's not what this was. This was very thoughtful responses from both Dana Nieder and Kathy Binger, and a lot of other actually AAC celebrities in the comments. A lot of big names were responding to this, and it was just beautiful. And that's how we learn, right? When we listen, maybe it doesn't change what we think, but at least we're open to different ideas. And I think that's the most important thing, especially when you're thinking about things that are, maybe somewhat controversial. Just really being able to open yourself up, put your ego aside for a second, and just really be open, because it's really important, especially as clinicians, to listen to a parent perspective. A lot of us clinicians, we're not parents to children with special needs, so we don't understand. Of course, we understand language and communication, and we have specialized training, but the parent perspective is very valuable, and I think it helps guide our practice if we listen to it, if we're open to it. So I just loved reading those comments. Like Chris said, I would highly recommend reading both Dana Nieder's article and all the comments below, including Kathy Binger's response. It was beautiful. I really loved it.
All right, so without further ado, let's listen to Rachel's interview with Alyssa.
Hi, I'm Matt Hott, one of the hosts of Speech Science, a weekly podcast bringing you all the information that you can handle related to speech sciences and disabilities. Michelle Wintering, Michael McLeod, and I interview leaders and difference makers in the field. Every Tuesday, we drop a new episode. You can find us on iTunes, Android, and on our website, www.speechscience.org/Speech Science Podcast. Join us as we try to find the answers to the question,
what is communication?
Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, and I'm so excited. Today we are joined by Alyssa Hillary Zisk. Alyssa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. It's finals week, but mostly I'm good.
Well, I'm so happy that you decided to come on our podcast, especially given you have such a busy week. So can you just start off by explaining to our audience who you are and your background?
All right. So in no particular order, I am a graduate student in neuroscience. I do work related to brain-computer interfaces, mostly for people with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So what that means mostly is I sit in front of a computer and argue with a program called MATLAB. I also do some general neurodiversity work, like looking at representation of neurological differences and queerness and such. And then I do work on augmentative and alternative communication for autistic adults, which that research is not directly about me, but it does apply to me because I am an autistic adult who uses AAC part-time.
Yes. You just recently had an article published. And so I really am excited. When you sent this to me, Alyssa, I was so pumped. I could not believe I was reading it. And I was just so excited because I feel like I haven't read an article like this before. So can you just explain this article to our listeners?
Alrighty. So I can tell you that you haven't read one like it before because I did a literature review and there wasn't one. I wrote an article about AAC for speaking autistic adults because even autistic people who use speech may experience intermittent speech. What that would basically mean is your ability to speak varies over time or between situations. This could include selective mutism, but it is not just selective mutism. Mm-hmm. For example, for me, my ability to speak will give out if I'm sick, if I'm tired, if I've already done a lot of talking that day. I expect to be typing this afternoon at improv, or sensory overload in addition to anxiety issues. We could have unreliable speech, so that would overlap somewhat with scripting, but not in the sense of all scripts being unreliable, just in the sense of if you fall onto a script that you don't mean to be on and it doesn't mean what you want, that would be unreliable speech. So you go to the doctor. You're not fine. The nurse asks how you're doing. You hit the I'm fine and you script. You're not fine.
Gotcha.
And then there's also insufficient speech, which is you can talk, but that doesn't mean you can say everything you need to. Initiating could be harder than responding. Emotional content could be harder than factual content. Any of a number of reasons. You might have speech that sounds good and just isn't enough. Mm-hmm. Autistic adults may use AAC to address literally any of those issues or all of them. Mm-hmm. Lots of free and low-cost tools that may or may not be designed specifically for AAC. It can make it less obvious that this is what we're doing in case we're around people who are going to be crap about this. But those ones usually aren't designed for purpose. We may also have dedicated apps. We might learn signed languages. I basically argue that autistic adults using AAC for these reasons is a good thing, that we should encourage it, and that we really need to know more about this stuff. The peer-reviewed literature that I was able to cite was all tangentially relevant, but this is actually about an autistic adult who uses AAC was basically all first-person narratives. Mm-hmm. Great, but not necessarily the information where SLPs are finding it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see this as a huge gap in the research, right? I mean, it's something that I, clinically realize the importance of in my practice. I work with so many children with autism, and they have, verbal language and verbal speech, but it's like you said, it's not always consistent. It's not always reliable. It's not always the preferred communication method, given the specific day and time and situation. And so it's something that I'm trying to constantly talk to parents, teachers, other SLPs about, because really what we want to do is we want to support communication in different situations. And it doesn't mean that we always use one form of communication across the board. But specifically, I feel like with children and adults with autism. And so I'm just so excited that you came on, decided to share your story, but also are really, making a profound impact as far as the research is concerned, and, showing there's a gap here. We need to, do more research about this.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the not just one mode of communication, do you only use one mode of communication?
Exactly. No, absolutely not.
Neither do I.
So Alyssa, I'm really intrigued. You have, you're a part-time AAC user. Did you ever have speech therapy, as a child, and what did that look like?
I had speech therapy when I was younger. It was frankly useless. I was referred to speech therapy because I had difficulty with the sound. They neither fixed my sound, nor did they catch on to my other speech and communication difficulties, intermittent and insufficient speech, that I now use AAC for. Chinese class fixed my sound.
Wow.
No one has ever successfully taught me how to make the standard American sound, but the Chinese teacher was able to teach me how to make the one that's used in Chinese. And as long as it's fluid and recognizable, no one notices the difference.
No, I mean, I definitely never noticed. So well done, Chinese teacher. So let me ask you then, I'm so intrigued. How did you learn about AAC? Because it sounds like the professionals that were in your life were not the ones who introduced you to it.
I met other autistic AAC users.
Wow.
I learned about AAC from other autistic people, some speaking, some not, who used AAC.
Wow. Is there any type of, online support or community for, maybe adults with autism who are either interested in AAC or, I'm just trying to think, how can we bring, adult AAC users together, or just build that awareness in the adult, autism community?
On Facebook, I'm aware of several AAC groups. There's Autism AAC Community, I think is what that one of them is called. Autism AAC. No, it's Autistic AAC Community.
Okay.
Is one. There's Ask Me, I'm an AAC user.
Ooh.
It's not autism specific, but it is autistic heavy. Kate Ahern, who I know mentioned me when she was on. I don't think it was by name, but she did reference me. I was the math teacher.
Yeah, that's how we got connected, through Kate.
Yeah. I was the math teacher, but she has a group called AAC through Motivate, Model, Move Out of the Way.
Fantastic group. I'm a part of that group and just love her and all the work she does.
Many AAC companies have community groups for users, including AssistivWare has an adult user community. Most of those are closed groups, so you can search them, you can find them. You're not going to see what's posted unless you're actually in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like maybe I can reach out to some of these groups and see if there's anybody else who would love to come talk about their experience. Because, it's really, really something that Chris and I are really passionate about is really, what better way to teach and learn about AAC than to talk to actual AAC users, right? And so I think those are all really, great groups. And it sounds like you kind of have a pulse on the community, the AAC online community, which I think is so great that we have these online resources where we can, connect people who have common interests and, shared passions. So this is great. You talked a little bit about the scripts. Can you talk, because I know that's something that, as a practitioner, I work with a lot of children who are very good at learning scripts and they use them appropriately. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with scripting and scripts and what that's been like?
Yeah. So for me, mine tend to run heavily towards references. So I startle very easily. I have explained this to mathematicians, of which my master's in math and I teach math. So for all epsilon greater than 0, there exists a stimulus less than epsilon that will still manage to startle me. Basically, there is no minimum stimulus level where you can say anything less than that and I won't startle. No, if it's detectable, I might startle.
Oh, that's funny.
I use scripts because having a script that suits the occasion gets my point across at less words-making effort than coming up with new words and making mouth sounds at the same time.
So it's quicker, it's easier, it's, maybe in some cases more reliable.
I think that in order of reliability, on average, most reliable is hand me a keyboard, followed by factual information I have a script for, then other scripts, then original speech.
Wow. This is fascinating to me. And I think it's so important because I feel like how do we, as a practitioner, how do I, cultivate a therapeutic experience, that takes these things into account? And what better way than to talk to an adult, right? Like who has the experience and, has the communication now that allows you to talk about your experience. So I'm just, this is so exciting to me. You talked a lot about the keyboard, right? You talked about that's your most reliable. What kinds of apps do you use, AAC or otherwise, that can help support your communication?
Oh, goodness. So considering that writing for publication is part of how part of my communication that is communication, word processing programs. OpenOffice is one of the first things I install on any new computer, both for writing for publication and because in meetings and for presentations, sometimes my communication method is I'm going to open up OpenOffice, I'm going to make my font big, and I'm going to project my screen to the room.
Yeah.
I also have Proloquo for text on my iPad.
And how do you explain to somebody who maybe thinks,
I have more apps.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Please continue. I'm so excited, Alyssa. I have so many questions.
Yeah. I also have FlipWriter on my iPad. FlipWriter's main thing is it takes whatever you're typing and flips it over so that somebody sitting across from you can read what you're typing without needing to spin around the iPad. It's on the iPhone as well. It also has speech generation using system voices, which might be lower quality, but does give you access to text-to-speech in any language iOS has a system voice for.
Oh, wow.
That's super valuable because I speak more than just English. I have inconsistent speech in English and Mandarin Chinese.
Oh my goodness, you're impressing me by the minute, Alyssa. Any other apps that you use?
See, I have eSpeak on my laptop. That's not designed for AAC, but it's free and it does text-to-speech, and again, it does Chinese. And then low-tech, I've used whiteboard markers because I was a teacher and a grad student. We're all already using those. Let's grab them for when speech isn't working too. Pen and paper, pen and index cards, because the index cards fit in my pocket and they are good for leaving with students. That I think actually covers the apps.
Yeah, I think it just reiterates the point that you can use multiple modalities, multiple apps, multiple communication systems, depending very heavily on the context, right? And where you are, and not only the context of the environment, but also the context of, your state that day. How is your body feeling?
Very much so. And I remember in another episode of this podcast, there was the question of talking about alternative systems versus backup systems.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, I think it depends on the reasoning for the multiple systems. If I'm writing on an index card and leaving it with a student in my class because it fits the need for the situation, I can answer their question and move on and help someone else, and they don't need to remember what I just wrote because they can read it again. That's an alternative.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm writing on an index card at lunch, when I would rather be using FlipWriter to talk to the person across from me, but my battery's dead, that's a backup option.
Gotcha. That's a really good differentiation that I think is important to make, because we often think of like, and I feel like oftentimes, even myself, like I think through the lens of, okay, like, this student is using X system, right? We forget that there's all these other types of systems, apps that could potentially be beneficial, especially, with typing and, systems where you're able to use word processors and this FlipWriter, which I'm really excited to check out and see what that one's all about, because I haven't even heard of that.
It's cheap too.
Oh, good. It's not always like that with these apps, so I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, by like App Store standards, it's not cheap, but by AAC standards, it's cheap.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely link to those apps that you shared in the show notes. But one of my questions, Alyssa, is, how do you explain to people who, maybe you've had a situation where you've had a conversation with them, just a verbal conversation, but then, the next day you're having a hard time, whether it be you're feeling tired or, it's the end of the day. How do you explain to them, I use alternative systems to communicate sometimes? Is there a way that you can, approach people with that information that,
It varies. At one end of the spectrum, I have dumped this on people with no explanation whatsoever. I'm not going to lead in with an explanation of why I'm typing today. I'm just typing today. Or I didn't warn you that this was a thing that could happen. And now speech is out. It went out in the middle of class, but I can reach the side whiteboard from where I am, so I'm writing on the board now.
That's really amazing to me that, so quickly it can just feel like the inability to communicate, right?
It cuts in and out, sometimes on the order of minutes.
Wow.
Especially if flashing lights are part of the picture, it will go real fast.
Wow.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, there'll be that this is the formal accommodation that I am registered with disability services for at my university. So I have a letter from disability services with wording that I've been able to workshop because I'm the only one at my university who has this right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I send the PDF of the letter to my professor ahead of the semester. We have a meeting. They have no clue what my accommodation actually is because I'm the first one they've met. I explain. I offer to show them the apps, talk about the classroom layout, talk about, given that layout, which ones are most likely to come up,
mm-hmm.
and what am I most likely to actually use in their classroom. Whether it's e-speak, whether it's a whiteboard marker, whether it's Proloquo for text. It's been all of those. It's been FlipWriter too, actually. I think it's been literally all of them.
Okay. So have you had any pushback or any negative experiences, or have people generally been pretty open?
People have not argued with me about the AAC use itself, but I have noticed a different treatment otherwise, depending on whether people meet me speaking first or whether they meet me using AAC first or whether it's one of those only. And I have noticed differences in how much I'm included in discussions in some classes depending on which one I'm using.
Yeah, because I guess you might think if someone's first experience with you is as, an AAC user, that they might feel like different than if they hear you speaking first. I feel like that might be a natural inclination, but how can you communicate that, I'm sure you want to be involved in the discussions, right? At least, at some level, depending on the day. How can
That's why I've got these tools.
Right, exactly. So how can you advocate and really just inform? I feel like it's a lot of people probably just aren't informed about it, which is why I'm so excited we're doing this podcast, because hopefully we can spread this word. But are there any things that you can say to people or even to our listeners to just open people's minds to this idea of being a part-time AAC user?
I mean, as far as the level of inclusion, I would love to be able to say that it's about knowledge, but considering that the discussions where I was most included were with professors whose lead-in question when I explained my accommodations tended to be things like, I'm happy to accommodate you, but looking at your letter, I have no idea what this is. What do you actually get? I'm not convinced that the way we usually teach people about it is the way that actually leads to that kind of inclusion. I mean, I know that allowing more response time for AAC users matters. That part of education is great, but somewhere in what we've been teaching, I think there's an inclination to underestimate or to ask less, and figuring out where that's coming from, it's probably something deeper, because we generally try not to explicitly say not to expect people to be able to participate, but it's the clueless, it's the people who have never heard of this before who tend to do the best.
Wow. I think that poses a really interesting question. Where does that come from? And I'm just kind of thinking through it. And, perhaps people realize that, if you're, or maybe the assumption is if you're using an alternative communication system, that the act of communication in general is sometimes challenging. And so, not wanting to feel like we're, putting a demand or a pressure on the situation. But I think there's a way that we can do this and, really support, like, we want to know what you have to say. We want to include you. We understand if today is not a good day or this moment's not a good moment, but I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's like, how can we get that inclusive piece, so that you can decide if you want to, participate or not. You can decide if it's the right moment or not, instead of having, somebody who's leading a discussion decide for you. Does that make sense?
That definitely does make sense.
And I think part of how we, educate is things like this podcast. So, I think it's just such a valuable experience listening to your experience. And so hopefully these things will change over time. I definitely would love, if I could say my AAC wish list, I would love more acceptance and general education about how beneficial AAC can be on a part-time basis, especially for individuals with autism. I can't tell you how many times I get the question, well, he's talking. Why would we use a device? And I'm like, well, exactly. You can't see us, listeners, but we're like shaking our hands crazily, because it's so frustrating. And you know what I'm going to say now? I'm going to say, well, I've done a beautiful interview with a part-time AAC user who, is an adult with autism, and just go listen to that episode. And that's why we use, alternative systems. And so I just think that this article is fantastic, and I'm really excited. It goes into so much detail, like you said, about, unreliable, speech, insufficient speech. I think the breakdown is really important because, it's not just one thing. It could be a multitude of things kind of overlapping over each other. But the end of the day, using alternative systems is, sometimes probably more efficient and more comfortable for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have taught face-to-face classes and I have taught online classes. Having taught similar content, 75-minute class in both cases, online at an hour when I would rather be asleep versus face-to-face with oral speech at a time that is theoretically the peak of my day, I am much more tired after doing it face-to-face than I am online, even though by the end of the online class where I did not speak, it's late enough that I should be asleep.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's so fascinating. So what would you say is the biggest challenge that you face being a part-time AAC user?
Other people. Not so much in the sense of other people actively trying to prevent AAC use. Thankfully, I've been fairly lucky there. But other people in terms of, with the exception of other autistic AAC users, no one's really been suggesting this as an option. So finding out about it required community involvement.
Mm-hmm.
Other people in the sense that they may see me using AAC for different reasons, because speech could give out on me because there's construction, or in one case, explosion testing in the environment where I'm supposed to be working.
Mm-hmm.
This is an ongoing sensory trigger. Frankly, I should just go home. Or I could lose speech because it's the end of the day and I'm tired.
Mm-hmm.
Or there were sensory triggers on the way to where I am, but the environment where I am now is fine. People who've primarily seen me needing AAC for one of those reasons may consistently react to all of my AAC use like it's from that particular cause.
Mm-hmm.
And no, if it's the end of the long day, I'm going to pull out my tablet and I'm going to be fine. If there's explosion testing, I want to go home. I want to go home now.
I don't blame you.
And essentially, my needing to use my alternative communication options isn't a good signal of my mental, emotional, physical state, but it's the visible signal that a lot of people go by because they have trouble reading my body language.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be an example of, other people.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think that we just need more, adults who use AAC part-time to kind of talk about their experiences. And I know just, this conversation that we've had has completely, shaped the way that I want to practice. And I feel like I had already been practicing that, but it's just like so reaffirming to talk to you, to listen to your experience and confirm what I already kind of suspected, that we need multiple systems. And I'm just such a big believer in we need to allow individuals to choose what works best for them in, any given moment. And so I think as practitioners, because there's a lot of practitioners that listen to this podcast, just being really mindful of, we don't know what system or what app or what's going to work best. And so I think constantly trying to introduce our clients, to that. And then of course, educating parents, teachers, other therapists about everybody. Exactly. Knowing that, this is a tool. It's not like, I think that oftentimes when we think about augmentative and alternative communication, we just think about the alternative piece, right? But, let's augment communication, right? Like
one of those A's stands for augmentative. And
exactly.
With the multiple tools, I see people being like, this device, this specific app is your voice. Yes and no. It's my voice. Mine. Leave it alone. Don't take it away from me. What the hell, guys? But also, it is a tool. It is part of my voice. It's not the only thing I use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We always ask the people that we interview on this podcast, if you had a billboard that every SLP read, what would you want your billboard to say?
All right. So I think I may need to give a little bit of explanation after the billboard, but the billboard reads in all caps, AAC for everyone.
Yes.
And the explanation is on one of ASHA's more inclusive definitions, because they define it in a couple different places. They describe AAC as covering all of the ways that people communicate instead of or in addition to speech, and they note that we all use it. That it includes things like texting, it includes things like writing, it includes signed language, it includes body language. We all use it. But then when we start thinking about implementation, we tend to think of it as an intervention tool, a therapy tool, and not as a life tool that we're using everywhere and that should be considered for everyone. Everyone, or just about everyone, is going to experience a time where speech is not their preferred option, whether it's because they want to pass a note to a friend in class instead of having the teacher hear what they said, whether it's because they're texting in the back seat to keep their mom from hearing it, whether it's because they're texting because phones are hard. AAC for everyone. No, really. Do it for real.
No, really, everyone.
Yes, your client whose speech sounds good.
Exactly. Oh man, Alyssa, I need you in my back pocket every time I talk to, a parent or a teacher who's questioning me.
Well, you don't have me in your back pocket, but you have a peer-reviewed article that I am first author on that I probably should not encourage you to literally roll it up and hit people with it, but to metaphorically do so.
Yep. I will definitely metaphorically do that.
And I am allowed to send it to people who ask me for it, so just a heads up, y'all. If you ask me for it, you will get it.
Lovely. So where can people find you?
I have an email address that I think I gave you.
Perfect. We can link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. I have an academia.edu page. That has a lot of my published stuff because this is actually not the first time I've written about AAC publicly, and it's not going to be the last. Those are probably the best ways to get at me. I am not going to give you all a phone number for reasons that may be obvious.
Oh, I love you, Alyssa.
I don't use my phone for that.
Yes. So speaking of all, these publications and your kind of academia work, what is on the horizon for you? I'm just so excited about the work that you've already done, and I'm just dying for the work that you're about to do.
Okay. So I have an essay that was accepted with minor revisions and then revised and then turned in for the journal Curriculum Inquiry about how and why taking a formal class on augmentative and alternative communication was actually really awkward a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Not the professor's fault, but am I a student? Am I the curriculum? Am I a teacher? Am I all of this at once? What am I part of what should be the curriculum, but not actually here because autism research focuses on kids and I am not 5 years old?
Yeah.
And I am not an emerging communicator. The other projects that I'm working on, I have things related to brain-computer interfaces. And I am also working on a survey about the awareness, use, and perceived effectiveness of AAC strategies for autistic adults, because the sample size of public writing by people who use AAC and care enough about it to talk about it publicly is not that big. There's way more autistic adults in the world than that. I want to know how many of us know about the option, how many of us are using it, what's working, what's not, how are we finding out about it? Because it seems to mostly not be through professionals, and that seems like an area where, come on, professionals, you can do better.
I could not agree more, Alyssa. I'm like, that's why we started this podcast, because we really need to inform speech language pathologists, especially, but all professionals, about AAC. And there's a lot of myths surrounding them, one of which being a child, if a child talks, they don't need AAC. Not true, right? So, I think that the work you're doing is truly amazing, Alyssa, and so important. And so I'm just so happy that you were able to come on and share your story. I can't wait to have you on again. This is not the first, or this is the first interview, but it's definitely not the last. I definitely am interested in, all of the amazing things that you're going to do on the research front, and just building awareness. I think that's so important. And I would love, AAC users, part-time AAC users. Love to talk to more of them. I'd love you to get more information from them. So I just really commend you on the work you're doing. It's truly amazing. And I'm just so happy that you were able to come on today and share with us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm guessing then that you might want me back when I have more research.
I could talk to you all day, Alyssa. So you don't necessarily have to have more research to come back on. Definitely when you have more research, we're going to have you on.
Alrighty.
All right, Alyssa, thank you again so much for coming on. For Talking with Tech, I'm Rachel Madel. We will talk to you guys next week.
You're listening to the Exceptional Podcast Network.